Good morning, everyone. A very warm welcome. I hope you can all hear me well. I would like to welcome you indeed to this media briefing to learn more about a first-of-a-kind assisted attempt to re-enter the Aeolus satellite. I'm very happy that I am here today with a variety of speakers. The first one to name is Simonetta Kelly, Director for Earth Observation. She will be followed by Holger Krag, Head of the Space Safety Office from ESA, Tommaso Parinello, the Aeolus Mission Manager, and then last but definitely not least, Isabella Rojo, the Aeolus Operations Director from ESA. A few logistics maybe on the site. We will record this media briefing. It will also be available online shortly after this media briefing for those that cannot follow us right now in this moment. We will start with a short introduction by the four speakers, followed by a Q&A session. I hope that we have quite some time for the Q&A. So please, if you have questions coming up during the introduction, remember them. You will be able to ask them later on towards the end of the media briefing. You can flag in the chat that you have a question. Feel free also to type the question. You don't have to. You will be able to unmute your microphone and then you can ask the question or we can read it for you. I leave this up to you. And with this, I would like to give the word to Simonetta Kelly, ESA Director for Earth Observation. Welcome, Simonetta.
Good morning, Nina. Good morning, dear colleagues from the media and colleagues from ESOC. We are here, in fact, for this media briefing, which is a media briefing on Aeolus reentry, which we will do in the coming days. You will hear all about this, but this is a first of this kind reentry at ESA because it involves quite a technical expertise, passion from the teams, high commitment by all the people involved. And in fact, it's never done, I would say, in terms of the fact that we are trying with this reentry to make the best that ESA can do in terms of complying with the international regulation, in spite of the fact that Aeolus was conceived, decided by member states of the agency and also developed and built before the actual current regulation on the end-of-life disposals were coming into life. So we're doing this with the best standards that we have today. We do this in a collaborative mode between the Earth Observation Directorate, that of course has managed the building and the operations together with ESOC of the Aeolus mission, and we do this with the ESOC colleagues who really will do all the operation related to this re-entry. So what is all about Aeolus? Aeolus, it's an Earth science mission. It's a so-called Earth Explorer mission that was developed in the context of the Future program. It's a program that enhances innovation in terms of technology innovation and science excellence. And this is really what Aeolus has done. It's a satellite that was built over quite a number of years because it was called the impossible mission in terms of challenges and in terms of technological developments. It was launched in August 2018 and it went well beyond its initial planned lifetime, which was of 3 years. It's been ending its lifetime formally on the 30th of April this year. And it's then carried out a number of activities which were called the Aeolus Beyond phase in the weeks after the 30th of April to get additional information and test and validate some elements to prepare for future Explorer mission like the EarthCare that we hope to launch next year. But what was all about Aeolus? Aeolus is a mission that was flying and has been flying a first ever LiDAR in space, so a really an advanced mission in terms of technological development, in terms of innovation, and it's been providing data on wind profiles on a global scale. And these data were not just relevant and not just being relevant for the scientific community. You would like to look at perhaps the number of numerous science publications associated to the results of this mission, and Tommaso Parinello, who's the mission manager, will tell you all about that. but it's been a mission that has provided also great results in terms of operational use of the data, for example, by ECMWF, the European Center for Medium Weather Forecast, that has improved its weather models thank you to the integration of the data from Aeolus into its models. And during the COVID times, when planes were not ready, they were grounded and not ready flying, the data from Aeolus were used as really essential complementary element to have weather forecast and in support of all what we needed in that domain. And just to mention an example, the Hunga Tonga events with the tracking of the plumes was another great result in terms of use of the data from Aeolus. So what did we do afterwards? We managed to have a science mission of ESA, a Future Rio Explorer mission, become an operational one. And we have proposed to the member states at the last ministerial in November, a mission called Aeolus 2 that we now implement in collaboration with EUMETSAT, which is planned to be launched at the end of this decade, which is 2 satellite mission based on expertise on the results and achievement of Aeolus. And this Aeolus 2 mission will be an operational mission that will be somehow the results of what all has been demonstrated and developed through Aeolus 1. So a real success story, and a success story that I think also is confirmed by the oversubscription to this program that was done at the time of the last ministerial. The economic value of such mission should also be pointed out. In fact, we have recently, in preparation of the ministerial and the Aeolus 2 program, carried out a survey in terms of an economic survey with London Economics, and such survey indicated the value, the economic value of the Aeolus 2 mission, which comprises 2 satellites of over 7 billion euros, and the one related, which is basically the double of the one related to the Aeolus 1 mission. So today, we are here to present you the plans for this assisted reentry, which is happening in a few days. And this is really to say that also from the Earth Observation Directorate, we have a strong engagement to support the current priority of ESA, which is related to managing at best space debris, to manage at best space safety, and of course sustainability, not only on the Earth, but also in space. And this is really trying to implement already with the techniques we have, with the technologies we have, and with the expertise that we have overall in Europe, a real sustainability of the sector. As you know, most of the Earth observation satellites that we launch and have launched and will launch in the coming years, we have over 40 in development, will be in the LEO orbits around 800 kilometers from Earth, and we must guarantee that in the future we don't keep these orbits completely full, and we manage at best the way the spacecraft are coming back safely home. And that's why we're here today, and I will let my colleagues really complement with all the technical and relevant details on the plans. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Simonetta. And with this, I would like to give the word to Holger Krag, Head of the Space Safety Office. Holger.
Thank you, Ninja, and good morning, everybody. From my side, I wanted to give you a bit the wider context on what we are doing here, how it adds to the safety of spaceflight and also the sustainability of our environment. Today, we do have 10,000 spacecraft in space, of which 2,000 are not functional. In terms of mass, we are speaking about 11,000 tons of on-orbit mass. And in terms of numbers of objects, we are speaking about 30,000 objects that have a size of 10 centimeter or more. And when it comes to smaller objects, 1 centimeter and larger, the number is at the order of 1 million already. Now, that is what is in space. Now, let's look at what comes back on ground and reenters. And that is about 100 tons in a year that reenters in a natural way. So you could say there's roughly 1 larger reentry event once per week. That's the situation we are in today. So for ESA, both the problem in space and on ground is a major concern. And as many of you will know, there are international guidelines that have been developed and documented, which are today, unfortunately, only partially fulfilled. So several dozens of objects, unfortunately, are stranding in space every year, and still, the majority of the objects still re-enters in a natural way and not in a controlled way. At the same time, and that's very apparent, the use of space is undergoing a revolution. So when you look back at what we are launching in these past few years, that's more than all humanity has launched in the whole history of spaceflight together in the decades before. So we are really starting to use space in these days. 2,000 objects have been launched in the last year. So this is 20-fold of what it used to be before. So we have a situation where we have a combination of an increased use of space and still insufficient technology to prevent the risks from space. And that you can see from the many natural reentries and also from the number of objects stranding in space each year. So in response to this, ESA has taken the initiative to improve the situation for its own missions by 2030. So everything that will be developed afterwards will become what we say debris neutral. And that means clearing precious Earth orbits after the mission. That means also that after 2030, then active removal of spacecraft by dedicated vehicles would become mandatory whenever the space system was not disposed successfully by its own means. So you could say that in the future, we are aiming at rules that more or less compare to what every national park asks. So the thing that you bring in, you need to take out again after the mission. The safety on ground is also an important measure for us today. Typically 20 to 30% of the spacecraft mass can survive the reentry, and atmospheric conditions, aerodynamic heating destroys the spacecraft, but 20 to 30% of the mass can survive. Although the likelihood of a damage or an injury is very small, and so far no injury has been reported, despite of the 100 tons re-entering every year. We take this aspect very seriously, and future spacecraft will have to be designed, in particular when they're large enough to do a controlled re-entry. And that means that it will have to have a propulsion system on board that is large enough to change the orbit in a way that a target area on the ground can be safely met. Today, this is not done by spacecraft. This is done only by launcher stages. But in the future, you will expect to see that also happening for larger satellites. Now, smaller satellites, they will probably go a different route. They will see a design change. A component that have a certain likelihood to survive the re-entry can be swapped against other components that are designed for demise by using alternative materials or changing the configuration of the different subsystems on board. ESA wants to act on all these points and then gradually start to implement these technology and rules into its own guidelines. And we want to be here at the forefront of sustainability and what we call it debris neutrality. And we want our industry to be competitive. And self-committing to these kind of more ambitious rules also means that the technology must be available. You cannot ask for ambitious rules without the necessary technical support. And for that, the ESA Space Safety Program has been put up, and it puts together the technology that will make this more ambitious regulation possible. And that includes the better robustness of our spacecraft platforms so that we can achieve the disposal with a much, much higher likelihood than today. The technology that ensures that all energy sources on board can be completely depleted and passivated to prevent on-orbit breakups or explosions. Deorbiting kits that you can mount on the spacecraft before you launch, and that can then autonomously maneuver spacecraft out of space to increase the likelihood of a successful disposal from space. And of course, our flagship, which is missions that can capture stranded spacecraft in orbit, which is something that we will try out with the Clear Space 1 mission for the first time in a few years. And then finally, of course, the technology to limit the risk on ground that I already mentioned before. Of course, ESA may not only proceed all on its own, we also want others to follow that. And for this, we are convening industry, agencies, and regulators to jointly develop what we call a zero debris charter. And this, we want to really stimulate all the environment around us, industrial, regulatory, to follow similar ambitions. It will be a collaborative effort that we put together and that we convene. And it is already receiving quite some attention and also support by the European space industry as far as we can see. But now, more specifically coming to Aeolus, as we heard, this spacecraft was designed and developed years before any guideline came into place. And in the light of ESA's drive for sustainable action, we decided to go well beyond Aeolus was required to do when it was designed and built. So the assisted reentry that we will do will further reduce the risk, which is already small, on ground that is posed by the reentry, by turning the natural decay into an assisted reentry. This is a novel way, and we basically make the best use of what we have in terms of means available with the system. I think ESA has always been a responsible space actor, and with that action on Aeolus, we are demonstrating once more that we are willing to achieve everything, even with the space system that was not originally prepared for this. So we hope that by acting as a role model, we can also stimulate other actors in space to take more efforts. Space, and that is apparent, is limited and shared, and therefore space sustainability must be a global effort. To ensure that spaceflight of the future, we need to significantly improve the way we design and operate the missions today. And that means we need to achieve something that we would call, or is called in the community, space traffic management, which comprises the monitoring of the objects in space, the prevention of debris generation at really, really high reliability levels, and then also the removal of space objects retroactively by dedicated missions whenever they get stranded in orbit. All these aspects must come together in a future space traffic management regime. However, we in ESA and also many other pragmatic players, we don't want to wait for this. We would like to move ahead already now, and then rely also on the additional technology that will be catered for by the technology program, including the space safety program. With this availability of the technologies, we will then also hopefully lower the hurdles for all regulators that they can also take more ambitious steps. So to conclude, in this context, we may look at this assisted reentry of Aeolus to be one of the first steps taken in a row of many more ambitious steps that will need to follow for space sustainability. And here I conclude. Thank you, Ninja.
Thank you very much, Holger. And with this, I would like to give the word to the Aeolus mission manager, Tommaso Parinello.
Thank you, Nina. Good morning to everyone. It's a pleasure for me to be this morning with all of you. And I will try to recap a little bit what we have said so far and a bit more in depth with talking about the mission itself. So Aeolus is one of our Earth Explorer missions, is part of the scientific satellite fleets of the ESA Earth Observation Program. It was conceived to be, I would say, a pathfinder, the first satellite to measure winds directly from space using a completely new technology with a laser. And this turned out to be not only difficult to build, to develop, but probably one of the most complex and challenging instruments to be put in orbit and to be operated. As already mentioned, it was launched almost 5 years ago from Kourou. His design lifetime was 3 years. We have managed to operate the satellite for additional 1.5 years, getting very close to his birthday, which is going to be next August. One of the main goals of this mission was to demonstrate not only the feasibility of measuring winds directly from space from 320 kilometers in altitude, but also to improve weather predictions, to advance the current meteorological models, and even importantly, to reduce the absence of winds measurements over large parts of our planet. Over the past 5 years, as already mentioned, Aeolus has been used by major weather forecast centers in Europe and used experimentally also from many others in the world, becoming today one of the highest impact weather satellites in orbit. The value of Aeolus data became very clear, as it was mentioned already by Simonetta, when it filled the gap during the COVID lockdown. That was the time when the commercial flights, which are one of the most important data source for weather forecasts, were grounded, and showed again how fragile we are also in that field. Thanks to this mission, we have learned how to better track hurricanes, how to survey the trajectory of volcanic plumes, Onga Tonga was mentioned before, and how to follow also dust and from the Saharan, for example, place, and which go into space and track that. Aeolus also has provided I would say, important insights on several atmospheric dynamic structures like the polar vortex, like the quasi-biennial oscillation, which has been very difficult today to measure and characterize before this mission came into play. And we are looking forward to many studies that will use the data, especially also to understand how climate is changing also the atmosphere and also the winds. So truly, after almost 5 years, it has exceeded all the expectations and gone beyond what were the original objectives. As noted already by Simonetta, not only the scientific impact, but also the economic benefits of this mission in our society have been fundamental for us, so that the next Aeolus satellite were approved at the end of last year. And probably this decision taken last year is the most tangible and most solid demonstration of the value of the success of this mission, which perhaps was not that obvious at the beginning. As you probably know, the normal mission ended at the end of April, soon after we started what we so-called Aeolus Beyond, which we implemented some end-of-life activities, which had the scope to test in space, which is a fantastic laboratory, new instrument configuration, which will be very important, not only for, I would say, for the next missions, Doppler wind lidar mission, but especially for Aeolus 2, which will come very soon and will fly at the beginning of next decade. In other words, we recognized that we had an incredible magical laboratory in space, and we said we should use it, we intended to use until the end. The instrument then was switched off on the 5th July, while we started already to decay slowly to the altitude where we will do the first re-entry maneuvers. As already mentioned by Olga, the satellite does not comply to the current regulation of space and safety regulation, just because at the time when this mission, the satellite was developed, they were not in place. For example, the satellite is not equipped with a suitable propulsion system to re-enter from space in a controlled manner. So the baseline to re-enter is an uncontrolled or a natural re-entry. However, and this is important, in order to reduce the risk of damage caused by this natural re-entry from space and to try to bring retroactively Aeolus inside the current policy, we looked into different solutions. And we came up with an approach which we called assisted, which technically is a semi-controlled approach, which is within the technical capabilities of the space and the ground segment of this mission. And as already mentioned and said, if successful, this likely will pave the way to re-entry of future satellites which have similar characteristics of Aeolus. And after this, I think I would like to thank you and give the floor to Isabel, the Flight Director Operations of the Aeolus re-entry, who will explain a bit more when and where and how we will do the re-entry. So thank you, Nina.
Thank you. Thank you, Tommaso. Good morning also from my side. I wanted to say a few words, but I would probably finish with the where and when. So as mentioned in depth by Holger, safety and space sustainability are a huge issue for us today, not only well, in view of the growing constellations and a more open access to space. So not only in the context of the re-entry, but also in the context of our currently flying satellites, which we want to keep safe and for which we have to perform some maneuvers to avoid potential damaging objects. And of course, now very specifically in the context of the Aeolus re-entry, ESA has put a real priority for this being done in a safe manner. And that's the reason why we're putting all of this effort into place to attempt a safer re-entry as possible. The teams have been put together have been collaborating for months now from the mission management side, together with our industrial partners and collaborators, as well as from the operations side. So we've all joined forces to take on this challenge, for which we do believe that at the very least, a great experience will be drawn to pave the way for the future and for safer and more responsible operations, because the cause is really worth it. Now, this whole campaign is going to be executed, is going to be run from ESA's Operations Center in Darmstadt. And this will start next Monday, the 24th of July, where we will put the plan into motion. And this will start with an initial set of maneuvers that will be executed on the Monday itself to lower the altitude from 280, which the spacecraft should have by then, to 250, to put it in an elliptic orbit. This will be then followed 3 days later by another set of maneuvers on the Thursday, if everything goes according to plan, which is intended to lower it even further from 250 to 150 kilometers altitude. And then finally, on the Friday, a last maneuver is expected to take place to bring it then further to 120 kilometers altitude. This is all indeed planned for the Friday, and after the execution of that last maneuver, the satellite is expected to then re-enter within 5 hours of this activity and will be tracked by a series of radars on ground. According to the plan, this re-entry will happen over a corridor over the Atlantic Ocean, and will gather a team of experts here on site, both from the side of flight dynamics to be able to compute the parameters of the maneuvers and the detailed orbit, but also from the ground stations, from the space debris, satellite expert supported by our industrial experts. So all of these entities will contribute to safely guide our satellite back to Earth. And that's pretty much all from my side. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to all the speakers. It was quite an introduction. Gave already quite some detailed information, but of course we're available and we're also here to answer any remaining questions that you might still have. So I am opening the floor. Feel free to put any questions you have in the chat. We can also read them for you if you feel uncomfortable speaking, but we can also unmute, or you need to unmute your microphone actually, in case you would like to address the speakers directly. You can also raise your hand and then we will give you the word. So I just give you a moment to see if there are any questions from the journalists participating. We have a question from Will Robinson Smith. He has raised his hand. Will, can you try to speak? Do you hear us, Will?
Yes, good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, very well. Good morning.
Good morning to you. Question for Isabel, I suppose. Given the number of spacecraft currently in orbit, as you and the team planned the route for deorbit, was that difficult in navigating around the rest of the operational as well as the defunct debris in orbit? And what was that planning like? Thanks.
Well, in the re-entry, Aeolus flies a very, very low altitude. So with respect to other spacecraft, so this is not a very densely populated area. But before we do any sort of maneuvers, this is all taken into account, and any conjunction risks are evaluated at that point in time. So a deviation from the plan, of course, is possible. This is one of the multiple challenges that we will be facing next week. Would you like to comment on that, Holger?
No, I think it's a perfect answer.
I hope this answers the question. Thank you.
I think I just had a very short network issue. I had lost the connection for a few moments. There is another question from James Brooks, Associated Press. James, can you hear us?
Hello.
We hear you.
Yeah, I put it in the chat as well. I mean, how unique is this assisted reentry method? Has anything like this been attempted before?
Do you want to take that one, Holger?
Yeah, I can try to answer that one. No, this is quite unique, what we're doing here. You don't find really examples for that in the history of spaceflight. You could consider the reentry of the Skylab space station in the late 70s. That was a bit of a similar type of assisted reentry by changing the attitude and therefore changing the exposed area towards flight direction and therefore atmospheric drag. Certainly with a by far lower level of control that we have here today. For a spacecraft mission of a normal type that we have here today, this is the first time to our knowledge that we do this assisted reentry.
Thank you, Olga. And there's a follow-up question from Jeff Faust, Space News. I just read it, Faust. I just read it, Jeff. It's how much of the spacecraft do you expect to survive the reentry? How much of it? Estimate.
I can take that if that is okay with you, Nina.
Yes.
Okay, we expect that more than 80% of the satellite will burn into the atmosphere, and likely 20% or less might reach the surface.
Thank you, Tommaso. Anyone who would like to add something here? There's another question from Juan Anton Catala. I'm not sure I pronounced that correctly. How will you maneuver the satellite? Will you use onboard capabilities? Question to Tommaso, maybe? Or Isabel?
I think both we can answer this question. We will the assisted reentry that we are basically implementing has gone through a lot of, we'll say, depth analysis from industry and ESA as well, and also from my colleagues from the flight control team. We have dedicated fuel for this reentry, and of course all the systems on board will be configured so that we have the best, I will say, configurations to re-enter the satellite. So there's been also some work on the satellite in order to prepare it for something which is also new for the satellite itself.
If I may complement just a little bit, Tommaso, so the maneuvers more specifically will be retrograde maneuvers, which means that we need to turn the satellite, to slew the satellite around in order for the thrusting to happen in the opposite direction of the flight. And this allows to lower the altitude. And of course, this means maneuvering at altitudes for which the spacecraft was not originally designed, because the spacecraft flight altitude originally was 400 kilometers. It's been flown at 320, but now we're going to maneuver as low as 120. So you can imagine that the technological aspects of the onboard systems had to be tuned for the re-entry. So we're really pushing that to the limits, and so a lot of tuning has been put in place to try to make this as successful and safe as possible. I hope we answered your question, John.
Thank you, Isabel. There's a follow-up question from Will Robinson-Smith. Do you want to ask it yourself, Will?
Sure. Following up Jeff's question, given that about 20% could make it to the ground, where do the current projections place that on the Earth? And is there a plan to recover any debris that makes it down, assuming it doesn't land in one of our oceans? Thanks.
Well, I can try and cover that one. Now, the number of 20%, that's roughly average for all space systems. So from that end, it's very normal that we have this amount of mass surviving. The assisted reentry is designed in a way that the reentry zone is indeed over ocean area on purpose. That's the safest place to undergo such an endeavor. And that means we don't expect the parts that would survive to float. So they would sink. So it will be very, very difficult to recover. And it has normally never been done in a space mission that there was an attempt to recover the parts. So we will not see any of these parts again.
Thank you, Holger. And Andrea Bettini is asking, I guess, a question to Isabel, if you could repeat when you expect the satellite to make a re-entry.
Sure. We expect, if everything goes according to our plan, that the re-entry takes place next Friday, the 28th of July, at some point in the course of the afternoon, evening.
Thank you, Isabel. I do not see any more hands raised or any more questions. So I just give it a moment in case any journalist present would still like to ask something. Of course, you can always contact us at media@esa.int. If after this media briefing you think, oh, I forgot to ask this or that, we're of course there available to help you. And for those of you that would like to maybe ask question or get a recording in French, Spanish, Italian, or German, that's also possible, because we will have follow-up rather informal Q&A sessions in these 4 languages following this briefing today. And there's a last question I see from Jeff House from Space News. What is the approximate size of the targeted re-entry location? Question to Isabel, I guess.
I'm not sure that I'm the best to answer this question. Maybe Holger, you can.
Okay, I
be
can.
more precise.
I can jump in. The semi-controlled reentry doesn't allow to limit the target zone, similarly to what we used to know from controlled reentries in the South Pacific uninhabited ocean. Here, the targeted reentry zone is somewhat larger. It will cover more or less the whole ocean area. As a time-wise, it is limited to 1 or 2 hours of time span, and therefore the ocean area that is in question here is a bit larger than what is typically known for a controlled reentry. But any reentry is not a local event anyway, because of the breakup of spacecraft and systems in the atmosphere. You usually have a trail of fragments that would anyway spread out over an area that is definitely larger than what at any localized specific point.
There is a question, Holger, if there is any reason why we aren't using Nemo Point for the debris to sink there?
Yes, that has to do with the inclination of the orbit, and that is the orientation of the orbit plane with respect to the equator. The Point Nemo is quite suited for the inclinations that are associated with human spaceflight to the space station. So around 51 degrees, because they nicely fit into that area and have a strong east-west component. So in our case, that's not the perfect match for our type of reentry that we have in mind.
In our case, having a polar orbit, it's more north-south. This is why this corridor makes more sense with respect to the orbit plane orientation.
Thank you, Isabel. Thank you, Holger. I think we're at the end of the Q&A. I don't see any more questions. Again, should you have some more in the days to come, please contact us at media@esa.int. If you would like to listen again to some of the things that have been said, a recording will be available on the ESA website shortly after this media briefing in a few hours from now. And I would like to thank all the 4 speakers that have been with us today, and of course, all the journalists that joined us. And we are looking forward to a successful assisted reentry next week. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.